to speak at Creative Mornings ever since I went to one of my first events several years ago back in New York. So this has been a huge goal of mine. So thank you everybody for coming out today, to sharing your time with me, to our Creative Mornings chapter here and all the work that they do. And especially thank you to my family who is taking up the front row. That's how we do. All right, so let's talk invest. So I've come to love this topic, and I think at first I felt a little bit intimidated by it. You know, I think when we think about the word invest, we think, you know, finances, money, savings, portfolio, none of which I'm qualified to talk to you about today. But one of the first words that came to my mind was this idea of risk. And so in prepping for this talk, I started asking myself, well, do I take risks? Do I, fully embrace what holds me back from taking risks in my life? What holds me back from investing fully in my life and in myself? And of course, asking myself those questions, it brought me to fear. The biggest obstacle to making any investment is overcoming that fear, right? So that fear of loss, that fear of failure, that fear when you convince yourself you already know the outcome before you give yourself a chance to try. And that's a lot. And in thinking about fear, I also realized that the best decisions I've ever made are when I've chosen to move through that fear and embrace uncertainty. Because when we choose to get out in front of our fear, we create space for ourselves to grow. We create space for opportunity to enter. And so the question becomes, how do we know when it's worth the risk? So I love being a designer and an entrepreneur because I get to ask these types of questions every day. I get to talk to people about their hopes, fears, and in doing so, I can help our clients make the most return on their design investment. See, I didn't go to design school, and I didn't go to business school, but I've been running a design business for 9 years, and it's called Raygun. Here we are. We're at the factory. And so in thinking about, what it means to design, what it means to really overcome those fears and those risks, I've come to understand that design is really a confluence of creativity and opportunity. As designers, we see color where there was none. We bring form and shape to ideas, and we turn words into symbols and symbols into movements. I feel it's a powerful force being a designer, and one that I don't take for granted because I know how hard it's been for me to get here. And so, the day I learned how to embrace fear was actually the day I called myself a designer. Whoops, that's not yet. I'll explain that in a minute. So I'm going to take you back. I'm going to tell you a little story. I'm going to take you back to New York City. The year is 2008. I was, newly out of college, and it was a remarkable time to be in the city. So President Obama was running his historic campaign. That old-timey vintage design trend with like the handlebar mustaches, like the spirit of the 1890s was everywhere. That was trending. And I was rocking this steel gray flip phone with unlimited texting. And so, the world to me felt like, anything could happen, anything is possible. And so here I am, in Williamsburg-ish, sharing an apartment with a couple of friends and a few mice. And I land this dream nonprofit job. I was hired as a marketing generalist, a sort of like all-around creative, handy person working at an organization called StoryCorps. And so I don't know if you got a couple public radio listeners up in here. And so if you don't know StoryCorps, it's a national oral history project that records, shares, and preserves the stories of everyday people. So across the country, anyone is welcome to come into a StoryCorps recording booth and get to record a 45-minute interview with somebody that they love. So imagine, just picture in your head, sitting across from the most important person in your life and getting to ask them the questions that you've always wanted to ask them. And every week, millions of listeners tune into NPR to listen to edited clips of a StoryCorps story. So you'll hear a boy with autism paints a beautiful picture of his life while his mom listens on. A husband shares his dying words with his wife of 40 years. A mother forgives her son's killer. And it was my job to get these stories out into the world in whatever way I could. So if you needed a flyer for the library event, I'm your girl. Need some font files, need a tagline, need a grassroots outreach strategy? Sure, I'm 24, I know exactly what that is. So, yeah, I'll do it. That's what you do, right? So it felt like a dream. And every day I'd go to work and be surrounded by some of the most talented and driven and passionate people I'd ever met. But as you recall, the year was 2008. And as the housing market imploded, so did some of our funding resources. So I remember the day when our founder at our all-staff meeting announced that cuts were imminent. And you could really just feel that tension and fear starting to build, right? And I'm sitting there and I'm really starting to feel like painfully expendable, right? I'd only been there like a matter of months. I really hadn't made my mark. And before we left, our founder also said, if anyone has any ideas for ways we could save money, please come forward. Your executive team is all ears. So we get up, we leave the room, and we're all like walking back to our desks, just like freaking out. I get back to my desk and my heart is pounding, and I'm like, y'all, he was looking at me when he said that, right? Like that, like, I swear he was looking right at me. I just began to feel like, okay, my job is on the line here. It's gonna be me. And so I'm sitting there and I recall, well, you do have an idea. See, I was hired in marketing, but what I really wanted to do was design. I'd learned graphic design in high school. I knew all the programs. I had all the skills. I loved it. But when it came time to go to college, I backed out of design school because fear had told me that I wasn't good enough, that I never would be good enough, and I wasn't even worthy enough to try. But here I was, and I thought that, well, the organization could save a lot of time and money if we were to bring our outsourced design work in-house, and I could be the one to do it. So I decided to tell them right away. I run back to the elevator banks. I'm basically in this like state of panic, like I have to save my job. And so I'm just like running past people. I get to the elevator banks. I'm hoping to catch my boss on the way down. And I'm standing there just like waiting for this elevator, and the elevator's not coming. And I'll never forget this because I'm standing there in my New York uniform, right? So it's these like black boots, black tights, black wool dress, and I'm just like sweating. And I'm like, oh my God, where is this elevator? And so at that moment, I had to make a decision, right? I either could, maybe back away, maybe like tell my boss later, get too afraid, or I could take the stairs. So that's what I did. I threw open the stairwell door and I start like marching my way up these stairs, skipping steps as I go. And as I'm going, I'm just working myself into this state of panic. And I reach the conference room landing and I'm just sweating and itching like crazy. And I throw open the conference room door, hoping to find my boss, maybe, a couple stragglers, they could point me to where she is. And as I throw open this door, I do find my boss. along with the entire executive team and founder of StoryCorps, sitting in a circle, completely startled, like staring back at me, like, yes? Quiet new marketing person? Like, what is the meaning of this? And so I'm like, oh, y'all, like, I'm so sorry. And so I'm standing there, and I just start in. And so I'm like, Dave, you said you wanted ideas. And I was just like out of breath. And they smile at me, and they're like, okay, it's okay, yes. Take a breath, come sit down. I sit down, but I don't take a breath, and I just start in. And I say, I'm trained in graphic design. I think that we have a big opportunity to bring this design work in-house. I could create a system, I could create a process, request forms, I could manage the brands, make a style guide, Pantones. I just start throwing out design terms, I know what I'm doing. And oh yeah, that could save us tens of thousands of dollars a year. Save the best for last. And they look at each other and they're like, did you know we were spending that much on design? And then also, that's a really good idea. So they smile, and I awkwardly smile, who knows? And they thank me, and I leave. And, I don't really remember what happened after that. Kind of blacked out. But, it might have been later that day or later that week, who knows? But eventually my idea was accepted. And that's the day I finally became a designer. So ever since that day, I've been working to hone my ambition without fear as the driver, to really make decisions based on intention and focus, not simply in the face of some external threat, but as a proactive life strategy. And seeing how much my mind and my world opened up on that day made me realize that I could do this proactively. I didn't have to wait for the next, crisis to drop or someone to hand me the opportunity. I could create opportunities myself. And I've come to realize that it is an act of creativity to manifest opportunity for yourself in the same way it is to design. But also, one of the most important lessons I learned, one of the most important realizations I had, was that I had to confront some deeply held beliefs I had about myself that simply weren't true. That told me I wasn't good enough. That told me I wasn't worthy enough to compete. So now when I pay attention to my habitual patterns of thought, I can more easily find and clear that clutter. I can find and replace those thoughts that don't serve me, the ones that hold me back, that tell me I'm not worthy. Because when my mind is clear, I can see opportunity where there once was a question mark. Because in order to connect the dots, you have to see them there in the first place. So when our minds are clear and our purpose is drawn, we give ourselves space to act with specific intention. And we begin to realize how where we are right now as individuals is an accumulation of the daily investments we've made, the daily choices we've made up until this point. So when you act with intention, you begin to understand, you begin to treat each choice as an investment in the outcomes we want to see in the world and in ourselves. I love that story. That's one of my favorite stories to tell. So, what happens when we take the risk and it doesn't work out the way we want it to? So, fast forward a couple years, my coworker, who then became my business partner, who then became my husband, and I relocate from New York to San Diego, my hometown. And I realize that there's a lot to unwrap in that sentence, and that's going to have to be a talk for another day, or grab a drink with me, I'll tell you. Dalton doesn't mind. And, we're starting over. We're adjusting to the culture of a new city, and we're helping our fledgling business through what ended up being, a very difficult transition. And I was starting to feel, very lonely. And add a newborn into that, and things start to feel very out of balance. And the thing I remember most about that early transition was just the exhaustion. I was so tired. I was taking on projects that I really didn't want to, that didn't serve my greater purpose, because I had bills to pay. I had a mouth to feed. I felt like I didn't have a choice. The demands of business and motherhood, coupled with this really intense move and what amounted to postpartum depression, really felt like it was breaking me. I was struggling to do everything right, but really feeling ultimately like such a failure. I'd made these choices, and I didn't know if they were the right ones, but here we were. And when you find yourself pumping in the back of a Subaru while trying to order a milkshake from the In-N-Out drive-thru on your way to a meeting you arguably shouldn't have taken in the first place, you really begin to question your choices. That was a tough day. And so, with everything happening, I really had to confront some of the toughest emotions and fears and feelings I'd ever had in my life. I felt like I was at the bottom of that stairwell again. But here's the thing. You can't half-ass being a mom, and you can't half-ass being a business owner. You're either all in or you're a shitty parent and you're broke as hell. And I didn't want to be either of those. So with the love and support of my amazing family, I was able to start working on the things that I needed to work on. I was able to take those pieces and start reassembling them in a way that would work for me. And what I started to realize, what was really missing for me, was the sense of connection, the sense of belonging to the greater community. We, like I said, we're just starting over. And with a business, you need a network. And unfortunately, when we'd first moved, I wasn't building that network. Depression was making me say no to the things that I really needed, and fear was making me say yes to the things that just got in the way. And so I took stock, I made my priorities, and I decided I needed my community. I needed to build my community in whatever way I could, because that to me was ultimately going to be my source of power, along with my beautiful family and my beautiful daughter. So I committed. It started with one networking event, and then another, and another. Pretty soon, within a year, I was throwing my own events. And then a year after that, a couple years after that, I walked out here to tell you my story. So leaning into the things that I knew were missing, in spite of that fear, in spite of that failure, really ultimately helped me get through one of the toughest times that I've had to face. It wasn't easy, and it took time. But my decision to ultimately invest in the choices that I made were far greater than the fear and failure that I've been facing. So to reinvest in myself meant to invest in my community. And my family and my community, all of you, have shown me love in ways that I can never express. I believe that each and every one of us has the ability to move beyond our fear and find success beyond our wildest dreams if we are simply intentional about the daily choices that it will take to get us there. Investment in the face of fear is all about stepping forward. It's stepping forward no matter the consequence. It's taking the stairs breathless and terrified because you know in your heart there is no other way but up. every decision that we make, every choice that we make is an investment in the outcomes we want to see in the world and in ourselves. And even if we take that risk and we don't get what we want, even in the face of loss and failure, we may finally find out what truly matters and continue to seek that out. And that, to me, is a risk worth taking. So my final thoughts I'm going to leave you with are this, is to remember your daily acts of intention. Remember that every choice you make, every belief you hold on to about yourself is an investment in our reality, in our world, in the outcomes. If you believe you cannot, then you will not. But if you believe the only way up is up, then you will rise. Thank you.